Okay, so today we are going to be pursuing another project. Um, we're going to make an arena style kind of RPG sort of game. In your teams, as I said a moment ago, ideally one of you will be writing code while one of you will be locating resources. Um, Next time, our project is going to be a JavaScript calculator. I talked about that. You could do a number of cool things with the JavaScript calculator. You could use Cordova to make it a mobile app if you wanted to. You could also have it just within a website for whatever purpose you wanted. You also could have it pop up in, like, use JavaScript to have it create the browser create a new window the exact size of the calculator and have a little pop-up calculator that you could have. And if that were the case, you could make it a Chrome app, right? You could use something like that, a Chrome OS app, that people can have on their Chromebook. So anyway, just give you a preview of what we have going on. Everyone, status good or decent on pop-out menu? Decentish will be done by next week. Cool, awesome. All right, so in that case, without further ado, let's hop over here and watch part one of this video. If one person in the group wants to go ahead and fire up brackets and somebody else, or the code editor of your choice, and the other wants to fire up Google or the search engine of your choice to locate some resources here as we go.
In the last two episodes, we talked about objects and object constructors, and in this episode, you're going to learn how to use objects inside a real project so we can actually see how we use objects inside JavaScript. Now, I did say in the last episode that we're going to build a game inside the browser, so that is what we're going to do in this episode. But I do want to point out that building a game using JavaScript for, like, a browser is something that is not it's not difficult depending on the game, but it's something that is slightly more advanced than what we did in the previous project. So if you watch this episode and you start thinking this is way too complicated for you, don't get frightened away by this episode. It's very important for me to say, because what we're going to do today is we're going to challenge ourselves a little bit using JavaScript, because JavaScript has a very specific way you need to think about it when you code using JavaScript. So you need to sort of change your mindset to JavaScript compared to like HTML and CSS and that sort of thing. So on a side note to that specific comment, building a game, I could have made something very complicated for this episode, and I could also have made something very non-complicated, depending on how long I want this episode to be. I had a lot of ideas in mind for this episode, for the video game that we're going to build. You can actually see it on the side here. And I scratched away a lot of the ideas because they would take too long to build together with you. So I sort of narrowed it down to the bare bone video game that you see in front of me. So that's what we're going to do today. Now, I just want to point out that in case anyone sort of jumps into this episode in the middle of the course without having seen the previous ones, this is a follow-up on the previous lessons that we've learned in this course so far. So this is not a how to build a complete video game episode. At least that's not what I'm focusing on in this episode. This is going to be how to build a simple video game using what we've learned so far, especially using objects and object constructors. So now that I mentioned that, we can actually go ahead and see what we're going to build for this episode here. So as you can see in front of me, I do have a completely clean index page with just a link to a style sheet and a font that I found on Google. And I have a style sheet that I use in order to style the video game. We're not going to do the style sheet in this episode. We might do that in a last episode following up from what we're going to do here, because a lot of people complain when I do styling in my episodes. So I'm not going to do that in the first episodes of this course here, of this project here. So these are the clean files that we're going to be working with once we get started on the video game together. Now the finished version, which is over here, as you can see, we have a couple of things going on inside the game. We have a text at the top that says, play the greatest RPG ever to be made. And I don't really think we can call this an RPG. This is probably more like a battle arena style game, if I had to put some kind of name on it. Where you can choose a character. So it says choose a character. Each of these characters have different stats. So they have different health, speed, agility, mana, that sort of thing. So depending on which one you choose, they're going to have different strengths and weaknesses. Now you will be able to see them once we do actually choose the character. That might be something we could have changed, so we can actually see them in here in the selection screen. But we're not going to do that for this episode. So if I were to choose something like the Rogue, and go in here, you can see we get into a fight screen where you can find an enemy. It says up here in the task. You can see the rogue that we chose and the different stats. You can search for an enemy, and you can see we have an arena down here, so we have sort of a battleground between us and the enemy. If I choose search for an enemy, it's going to select a random enemy that I created inside the code. So we have many different types that could randomly potentially be the enemy that is chosen. So if I click search for an enemy, you can see we get a troll in this case, and it also has different stats and that sort of thing depending on which enemy gets chosen. So I have in this case a troll, and I have a goblin, I think, inside my code. So these are the things that we're going to build in this episode. And then once we click attack, it's going to give us a pop-up that says you hit 15 damage 6 times. Now the damage, the amount dealt, is going to depend a lot on your strength. So right now the rogue has 100, which is somewhere mediocre, at least in my game here. And the agility is going to depend on how many times you hit using your character. So in this case, 6 times, because the rogue is not as strong, but he hits many times. And the warrior is very strong, so he hits hard, but fewer times, if that makes sense. So if I click OK, you can see that I hit first, because my speed is higher than the troll. The troll has 150, I have 200. Then if I click OK, it says the enemy hit me 17 times, 4 times, back the other way. I can click OK. And then you can see the stats change. So now my health is 32, and the troll has a health of 110. So it sort of changes, and you can sort of continue attacking. If we were to hit the enemy and our health, their health goes to 0, then it's going to end the game saying you won. My original plan was that once you beat an enemy, you jump to the next enemy, and then you would have a sort of counter that would say how many enemies did you beat, and then you would have a score at the end. Now, because of time, and because I didn't want to make this too complicated, that is not how we're going to do it. It's going to be very simple. You beat an enemy, and then it's going to tell you, if I was to do it again, and we are still going, apparently. There we go. I win, or you win, refresh the browser to play again. That's how we're going to do it. And then you just refresh the browser and start over. And again, it's a very simple game to teach you how to use objects and object constructors in JavaScript. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go inside my clean version that we haven't finished yet, that we're going to build together. And we're going to go ahead and start building this game together. So I just want to point something out. When it comes to JavaScript, and this is something I might have mentioned before, there's many ways to get to the same goal. So if you want to create some code that does something specific in JavaScript, there's no right and wrong way to do it. There's a efficient way, of course, and then there's an inefficient way, and then there's everything in between. And any way you might use to reach the goal that works is a valid way to do it. And again, this is just to mention that we're going to do it in one specific way in this episode here. And if you have another way of doing it, then you can try it out. If it works, then it works. And go ahead and build the game the way you want it to. But I'm just going to go ahead and follow one specific path to create this game. And then you can sort of follow it with me if you want to. So what we're going to do here, first of all, is I'm going to go ahead and create some HTML code inside my index page. What I'm going to do, if we were to go back to our game here, is actually let's go ahead and click into a character. There we go. You'll notice that we have different sections inside the game. We have a header up here at the top that has a task inside of it that says what you need to do. Then we have a player, which is shown here, that has all the stats and the pictures or the avatar inside of it. And then we have a an actions area where you can actually get the buttons that says what to do what. And then we have an arena area, and then we have an enemy area. So we have many different sections inside this game, and that is created using HTML. So if I were to go inside my index page here, what I can do is I can say, for example, I need to create and again, I'm just going to use divs for this episode. You could use sections, like section HTML tags, but I'm just going to go ahead and use divs just to make it easy. So I'm going to go ahead and use a div. And I'm going to go ahead and name this div header, which is going to contain all the tasks and the text and that sort of thing that goes at the top of the game. Then I'm going to create another container. We can actually just copy paste what we have here. And this one, I'm going to go ahead and call interface. Interface is going to be where we have our, whatever our character is. So right now we have the avatar, we have the text and that sort of thing. So that is going to be interface. Again, you can name it whatever you want. I'm just doing this because it makes sense to me. I'm going to go ahead and copy paste it again because we're not done yet. And the next one, I'm going to go ahead and call actions, because that is going to be the buttons that we have down here, which says, you know, search for an enemy and attack and that sort of thing. I did originally plan, again, to have attack, defend, and dodge as different actions you could do. And again, that became way too long. I could easily do it, but the episode would get way too long, so we're not going to do that in this episode here. So I'm going to go and call this one actions. If I spelled that correctly, I did so. The next section down here is going to be what is the arena, because right underneath the actions we have the arena. So I'm just going to paste it in again. And I'm going to change the name to arena. And then the last section at the bottom is going to be the enemy. So I'm going to just call this one enemy. Again, you can call it whatever you want to. I'm just going to call it enemy here. So now we have the different sections. And what we're going to do is, using JavaScript, we're just going to go ahead and fill in content into these boxes depending on what stage we're inside the game. So we could say that stage 1 is choosing a character. Then when we do something, it's going to jump to stage 2 and it's going to bring the information with it of the character we chose. And then it's going to create stage 2 where we have the actual character. Then stage 3 is going to be after we find an enemy. And then stage 4 is going to be when somebody loses or somebody wins. So this is how the game is going to be. So what I'm going to do first inside the header here is I'm going to go ahead and create the text that we have here at the beginning of the RPG. So right now it says play the greatest RPG ever to be made. So I'm going to go inside the header and I'm just going to go ahead and create a paragraph and insert the text inside of the paragraph. Then underneath here I'm going to create we could call it an H2 tag. I know that SEO wise you need to have an H1 tag on each page, but this is not that important of a header, so I'm just going to say choose your character is going to be a header 2. And afterwards we're going to go ahead and fill in the interface. Now right now what we have here with all the characters, I just inserted inside the interface. We could also insert it inside somewhere else, but the interface seemed like the right option for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the first character we have in here. I do want to point out that I borrowed pictures from another, what do you call it, an MMORPG game that you can find out there. It's the most popular one you can find. So I don't own these pictures. And again, I think it's okay as long as this is just a lesson and we're not going to publish any sort of worldwide game with it. So what I have inside my root folder, as you can see, I have my index page, my style sheet. I have an image folder, and inside the image folder I have the arena background picture, which is going to be just the transparent text that you see here. And I also have a folder called avatar-enemies and avatar-player. Inside the player folder we have all the player avatars. I just call them goblin. This should actually not be goblin, that should be rogue. We can actually delete this one. That is a mistake on my side. So we have hunter, mage, rogue, and warrior. And if I were to go inside enemies, you can see we have goblin and troll. So these are the avatars that I chose for this game. Again, if you want to get all the lesson files from this, you can download them on my Patreon in the description of this video. So I will have a link down there. If not, then just find something on Google if you want to use something else. Just know, copyright infringement. If you want to release a full game, then you need to have permission or create your own art. Just FYI. So I'm going to reference to these images when we do actually reference to the player over here. So what I'm going to do inside the interface is I'm going to create the first character that we can actually choose. So I'm going to create an anchor tag, and I'm just going to go and leave the hyperreference as a hashtag, which means that we're going to leave it empty. Now we won't be going to another page when we do actually choose a character. Instead, using JavaScript, we're going to replace the content inside these different sections inside the index page. So we're always going to stay on the same page inside our game here, which is kind of a neat feature of JavaScript. So what I want to do is I want to first of all insert the image for my character. In this case, I were to go back, you can see we have the warrior, which is the first one. So I'm going to create an image. And I'm going to link to the actual image inside my root folder. I do actually have the path over here next to me because I do have notes on the screen next to me. So I'm just going to go and copy in the path. Again, if you created a different folder system, then link to your image the right way that you did it. The next thing we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just create a alt, because that's important for Warrior for SEO optimization. Then afterwards, we're going to go ahead and create the character's title and description, which is right over here next to the image. So I'm going to go down to next line, and I'm going to create a empty div box. Well, it's not going to be empty, but we're not going to have a class inside the div box. And we're just going to go and insert the text that we want to have inside for the character. So I'm going to say we have an h3 that is going to be called Warrior. And then I want to create a paragraph. And I'm just going to go and paste in the text that I have over here in my notes. I'm just going to go and say copy and paste. Where is it? Right here. Now do notice that the text sort of describes what the character has in strength and weaknesses. So right now we do have high health and stamina, but the strength is also what makes them slower and clumsier and that sort of thing. Clumsier meaning that he doesn't hit as many times. So I do have a small description that sort of describes what exactly the character can do ability wise. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go ahead and copy our character, which is the anchor tags, and I'm just going to go ahead and paste it 3 more times underneath it, and then I'm just going to change the text and the different links that we have in here. So the second one is going to be the rogue, according to what I have over here. So rogue. I'm just going to change the alt inside the image as well. So it says rogue. And I'm going to go ahead and change the text, and I do have it on the side here. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy it and paste it in. Again, you can choose whatever text you might want for your game. Then I'm going to do the same thing for the mage. Now, I could have made this even easier and just not include a mage, because that would require us building mana into the equation, but I thought it'd be kind of funny to have something a little bit different. So we also have a mage in this specific game here, and again, I'm just going to sort of copy paste what I have over here. If this goes too quickly for you, just go ahead and pause the video so you can see what I wrote for my text. You can probably see it on the side over here as well. And the last one is going to be the hunter. I'm going to say hunter, hunter, and we're going to go ahead and copy paste here. The notes are sort of here to make everything easier for me so I don't make as many mistakes, because there's a lot of things we're going to keep track of in this episode. Hunter. And there we go. So now we have all different what you call characters inside our game. So if we were to refresh over inside our version of the game, you can see we have very big images first of all, because we haven't started using CSS. But we have the character, we have the title up here. Then we also have the text for we have all the stuff we created inside our HTML documents. So everything is here. The only thing I want to sort of change is the fact that the images are very big, because that might ruin it for us. So just for now, let's actually go and change the size of the images, so just so we can see what's going on. So I'm just going to say we have an image, and I want to style it, and I want to create a width set to, I don't know, 160 pixels. Let's actually refresh, see how big that is, and that's much better. So just for now, so we can see what's going on, just note this right here is the exact same thing as this over here. The only difference is that I include a CSS styling to this example here, and in this version here we don't have any CSS styling. CSS and HTML is very basic. It's something you should know going into JavaScript. So again, we're going to have a CSS lesson after we're done creating the actual functionality of the game. But you should know how to do this by yourself if you want to have something that looks like a video game. Just sort of throwing that out there. So I'm going to go ahead and go back inside the index page, because I'm not completely done yet. Right now, if I were to click a character, nothing is going to happen. If I were to click this character over here, you can see nothing happens. And that's because we need to go ahead and tell it using JavaScript that we want to run a method once we do click the specific character. So inside the anchor tag, and that's the reason we needed the anchor tag, because we need to actually do something when we click it, I'm going to create a onClick event that is going to tell the browser that once we click this specific character, it needs to run a specific function or method in this case. So what I'm going to do inside the onClick is I'm going to say we have, well, for now, let's actually not go ahead and fill it out because it's just going to confuse you because we haven't actually created the objects yet. So let's just go ahead and copy the let's actually go ahead and copy the unclick events and just paste it down inside the other anchor tags. There we go. In case you wondered how I did this by doing it multiple places at once, I just simply hold down Control and then I continually click inside my code and I can write many places, just in case you want to know. Because I get asked that quite often when I do my tutorials here, so I just want to throw it out there. So what we're going to do now is we're going to set up the different objects that we're going to use that is going to create the different characters in the JavaScript code. Because even though we created the characters in our HTML, we haven't actually created the characters inside the JavaScript yet, and that is something we need to do in order to be able to do something with the stats of the characters and take away health and that sort of thing. So what we're going to do is I'm going to create a new folder inside my root folder. Now, when you have a lot of JavaScript files, because we will have a couple different files in this episode to organize things, it's good to have a JavaScript folder inside your root folder, just like we have an image folder for all the images. So I'm going to say we have a JS folder, and then inside this folder, I'm going to save all the JavaScript files. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to save it inside that folder. And I'm going to save it as gamemanager.js. So game manager, if I can actually spell it correctly, manager.js. And then I'm going to go and create another file. So I'm going to say file, new file. And I'm going to save this one as player.js. Then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to save it as enemy.js. And again, just to point it out, you don't need to have a different file for each different piece of JavaScript code. This is something I choose to do because it's going to organize which JavaScript code does what, and then places it inside a document that is named after what the JavaScript code belongs to. So if I have code that is going to execute and change the way that the game runs, like changing the arena and that sort of thing, then I put it inside the game manager. If I have JavaScript code that is going to change the player, such as changing the stats, or that is going to run when the player attacks and that sort of thing, I put it inside the player file. And the same thing goes for the enemy file. So it's just a way for us to organize the code in a good way. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and link to these files. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and paste in the JavaScript files we just created at the top here. So right after the style sheet, I'm going to say we have a script tag. And I'm just going to go ahead and say we have a source that is going to link to a JavaScript folder and a game manager. Let's actually spell it correctly. I have a really hard time spelling today. Game manager.js. I'm just going to go and move it up here so it looks somewhat nice. And then I'm going to go ahead and copy the script tag and paste it 2 more times underneath it. Then change it to player.js and enemy.js. So now that we have this, we can actually go ahead and use the JavaScript code inside our our files up here. Now, you will notice that when we have specific code that does need to be loaded first before the HTML, then we place it at the top, and then we would have other JavaScript code at the bottom here just to make sure that the content inside the website can load fast. But in this episode, since we're not trying to build a really quick website and instead just build a game, it's very important that all the game elements get loaded first before we get all the visual, things inside the game here. So I'm just going to, use all the code inside these files to get loaded first at the top of the website before we load the HTML that we have down here at the bottom. So that's the way we're going to do in this episode since we're trying to build a game, if that makes sense. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create all the different objects we're going to use for this game here. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a game manager object inside the game manager file. Then we're going to go inside the player file and create a player object. And then we're going to go inside the enemy file and create a enemy object. So we're going to do that first before we start filling in properties and methods inside each of the objects. Now, to start with, let's go inside the game manager file. In this example here, we're going to create one object that is going to control what is going to happen to the game in each stage. Now, because we just need to have one game manager object, we're not going to create an object that we can create constructors of. So we're just going to go and create a completely regular object. So I'm going to say we have a let type variable called game manager, or we have an object called game manager that is going to be equal to curly brackets. And again, this is the shorthand for creating a object, just in case you forgot that from our object episode, which is 2 episodes back. And inside of here, we're going to fill in all the different properties and methods that are going to belong to the game manager object. The next thing we need to do is we need to go inside the player file and we need to create a player object. Now in this example here, we need to create many different instances of this specific object. So we're going to create a object constructor. The reason for that is that we have one character that is a warrior, we have one character that is a rogue, we have one that is a mage and a hunter, and we can have even more if we want to. So we need to create copies of this specific object, which means that we're going to create an object constructor. So inside the player object here, or inside the player file, we're going to create a function that is going to be called player with a capitalized P, because this is a object, parentheses, curly brackets, and then we need to fill in all the different properties and methods we might have for this specific player here. Now inside the player object, there's a couple of different ways we could do this, because like I said, there's many different ways you can create the same thing using JavaScript. We could include properties and methods of the player, which means that we have the properties which would be equal to the stats, such as the health, agility, the speed, mana, that sort of thing. And then we could also go ahead and insert methods into the player. So if the player were to attack the enemy, we would actually have a method inside the player object that would actually do the attacking and calculate the attack and actually change everything inside the game. We could also just have the properties inside the player and then have a separate object with all the moves that the player could possibly do that is going to calculate the attacks and that sort of thing. And because I originally planned to have many different move types, and which would end up becoming a lot of code, I did actually create this project here with a separate object that would control all the moves. So the second thing I mentioned. So that's the way we're going to do in this episode here. So for now, inside the player object, just know we're only going to fill in the properties for the player. And then the methods that the player can actually use are going to be inside a separate object. So inside the player object here, we're going to say that we have this class called player dot, and then the name of the specific property. So in this case, it could be class type, because we need to have the information about what kind of class we chose when we chose the player. So we have a warrior class, we have a rogue class, we have a mage, and so on and so on and so on. So we need to have this information when we bring it on to the next stage, because we will have the warrior written somewhere inside the next level. So if we were to go inside the finished example, you can see we have warrior. If we were to click, you can see we have warrior inside above the stats here. So in order to have this, we need to bring the information to the next stage, if that makes sense. So we're going to include the class type. It is going to be equal to class type. Again, if this confuses you, I did talk about this in the previous episode. And before we start writing all the different variables into the parentheses up here, we're just going to go ahead and finish the properties first. So I'm going to go down to the next line, say we have this, and then we have the health, which is going to be equal to health. And then we have this dot mana. I'm not sure if I say that correctly, because it's mana or mana, depending on where you come from. And then we're going to down to the next line. We're going to set this one equal to strength. Equal to strength. That is a really tough word to spell if you're not native English. This dot agility. Again, you could add a bunch of other sort of properties to this player if you wanted to. Again, this is just what I decided to create for the player. So if you have something else, you could do that. That is not spelled correctly. Agility. And we have speed at the end here. I hope I didn't make a mistake while I was talking, because I usually tend to do that. And I also tend to whistle into the microphone when I have too many S's going on at once. So when I say speed and this, then I start whistling into the microphone. It's really annoying, because sometimes I have to cut it out of my videos. So now that we have this, we do actually have the player object. We do need to, of course, include these inside the parentheses, because we're bringing in variables from outside the object. So we need to make sure we include them inside the parentheses here. So we're going to say we have health. And then we have mana. Then we have strength. And then we have agility, which I forgot to put a semicolon behind. That's important. And speed. That would have been a typo at the end of the game if I hadn't seen that. So now that we have this, we do actually have the player object, and now we need to do the exact same for the enemy object. Now the enemy does have the exact same stat info as the player does. So it has health, mana, strength, agility, speed. So we could just go ahead and copy the player object we have here and just paste it into the enemy file. And then we just change the name to enemy. And I do think I might have named my class type a little bit different. Instead of class type, I did actually call it enemy type. Because it's not really a class when you have goblin and troll. That is more of a race, you know, like a fantasy race. So I'm just going to go ahead and call it enemy type here. So now that we have this, we do actually have what we need for the objects. There's one more thing that we're going to do here, which is something that we haven't talked about before. If we were to create a player object constructor, which we learned about in the previous episode, by going down here and saying we have a variable called, let's say, player, setting it equal to new player object, and then just filling in information that we have inside the parentheses. So we have warrior as the first one, and then we have the health at the second one. We can say 200, and so on and so on and so on. If I were to create this inside the global scope like I just did here, we can easily access the object constructor from inside a method. Now here's the problem. Inside the game manager object we created, we're going to create a method that is going to create the info that is going to be assigned to the player object constructor. But we can't do that. If I were to create the player object constructor inside the game manager, inside one of its methods, then we can't access the object from outside the game manager object. So it's very important we declare the player object constructor inside the global scope of our files. So the way we do this is by, first of all, deleting what we have here. And instead, we're going to just declare the player object up here at the top. So we're going to say we have a let player. And that's it. So right now we declared the object constructor that is going to be equal to all the different information about the character, but we haven't assigned a value to it yet. So we declared it in the global scope and not inside a method, which means that this specific object is available to us everywhere because it's inside the global scope and not just available to us inside the game manager method, if that makes sense. I hope it does, because it's very important, this little detail here. So what we need to do as well with the enemy is we need to declare the enemy object constructor in the global scope. So I'm just going to go ahead and say we have a let enemy declared at the top here, and that's it. And again, it's very important for me that you understand why we declare object constructors outside objects and not inside objects. So if I were to go inside the game manager object here and create just a random method that we're not going to use later on, called name. Say we have a method by creating an anonymous function. And inside this method here, if I were to refer to the player variable we just created outside in the player file, and say we want to set it equal to new player objects, then we didn't declare the player object inside the method here, but instead we just assigned a value to it. And this is very different from if I were to do this and create the player object inside the method here. It's very different because right now we're just assigning the value, which means that the value in the global player object that we created inside the player file up here is now going to be equal to what we just created inside the game manager method. So it's available to us globally inside our files here. It's very important that you understand this, because this is something that will give you errors later on that you're going to pull your hair out of your head trying to figure out why can't you find the player object when you created it. And this is why that you might not be able to find it, because it has to be created in the global scope of your files. So I just went ahead and deleted what we created inside the game manager object, because that was just an example to illustrate a point. And I'm going to go ahead and end off the episode here because it's already quite a long episode. And in the next one, I'm going to go ahead and show you how we can create the different methods and properties. Well, we're not really going to have properties inside the game manager. We're just going to have methods. So we will be creating those together in the next episode in order to make the game actually do something inside the browser. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you in the next one.
Okay, now he mentioned that in the he mentioned in the intro that whenever you do your attacks and are subsequently attacked, you get a little pop-up window. You also could replace that arena area with some text, right? Get an element by ID and replace the inner HTML with something. You can even have it fade up or play a sound when that happens and different things like that. And if for your version of this project, if you as a team or as partners or whatever decide you want to incorporate that, go right ahead. I would love to see you do some things like that. Just as far as images, don't worry about a custom font. But as far as images go, if you just want to get on Open Game Art or just Google, those Warcraft, that's World of Warcraft, in case you were curious, in case you don't play the game. Grab those images just so you have some resources to work with. That would be cool. Alternatively, you could just open up GIMP real quick and make a 200 by 200 black square or something as a placeholder. Whatever is easiest and most convenient for you. All right, so let's hop over and watch part 2.
How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to our next episode. We're going to continue building on this video game we created in the previous episode. Now, I do need to apologize for the delay in this video because it's been quite a while since the first episode. As you can see, I moved office, so everything looks slightly different in the background. Don't worry, not everything is fine. I just simply moved office because the sound is a lot better in here. So, just to sort of improve the overall experience when you hear my lessons here. So, what we have here is our game from the previous episode. And as you can see, what we did so far is we actually built the first part of the interface without really styling it using CSS, because we're going to do that in the last episode, because CSS styling is not really part of the JavaScript course, if you can say that. So what we're going to do in this episode is we're going to go ahead and actually build the functionality of this game here. Just to sort of introduce what we did so far, we have a index page with a bunch of HTML markup inside of it. Right now we have a couple of players that we can choose from and actually choose a character, but we haven't actually set a JavaScript function to run once we click on one of these players inside the HTML markup. So as you can see, we have an onclick event on one of the players, but right now the onclick event is set to something empty. So what we need to do is inside our our JavaScript files, we're going to go ahead and set a player once we do actually click on a player inside the first page of this specific game here. So we have a couple of different things we need to do. First of all, we're going to go into the game manager, and inside the game manager, we're going to go ahead and create the specific method that we're going to use once we do actually want to select this player. Now, I do have a specific way of doing this because there's a lot of ways you can create the same different things inside JavaScript. The way that I decided to do it is I have a separate function that is going to set the player, and then I have one function, we're talking about objects now, so it's called methods. We have a separate method that is going to set the actual stage that we're inside of right now inside the file. So we have two methods we need to create, and we could create this inside one method if we wanted to, but like I said, we need to sort of keep functions and methods simple, so to do one specific thing each, if that makes sense, because otherwise we have these huge functions and methods that we can't really reuse if we want to. So we need to make sure we make them simple and usable, reusable, if you could say that. So inside the game manager, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go ahead and create a set game start method that is going to call on two other methods to run once we start the game. Now, I know this might not make sense right now, but just go ahead and wait for it, then I'll actually show you how exactly that works. So I'm going to say we have a method called set game start. And I'm going to go and say parentheses, and my keyboard is not set to what it needs to, so I just need to change the layout first. Okay, so I think the keyboard is working now. We're going to go ahead and create this method here, and we're going to set a anonymous function right afterwards. parentheses, curly brackets, and we're going to run two other methods inside this method here. So we're actually going to create two more methods underneath this specific method, so we can actually say comma and then get ready for the next one. So we're going to create a method called reset player, and this is going to be the one method that actually creates the player inside our game. So like I said, we need one method that does one thing inside the game and one method that actually sets up the game state inside the game. So reset player is going to actually create our player inside our game. So we're going to just say curly brackets, there we go. And then we're going to have another method that is going to set the first stage inside the game. So we're going to say comma, and then we're going to set a set pre-fight method. So we're going to say set pre-fight. Is that one word or two words? I think that's two words. So let's actually go ahead and make the F capitalized. I just looked at my notes because my notes have been capitalized. I can't speak today. So we're going to do it the same way as inside my notes, just to make sure we don't mess anything up. So we're going to say function, parentheses, curly brackets, and now I can see we do actually have three different methods inside our game manager object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run these two methods from inside the set game start method once we do choose a character. And there's a very good reason for this, which is that right now, if I were to go inside the index page, as you can see, inside the onClick event, we can only run one specific JavaScript function or method inside the onClick event. And we do actually need to have two functions or two methods run inside our object. So we need to have one object that runs two other one method that runs two other methods inside our object. So inside our set game start method, we're going to call on the other two methods we have below it. So we're going to say we have a this, which points to this object we're inside of right now, has a method called reset player. You can actually see it pops up here as a suggestion. And then we're just simply gonna close off the parentheses and then call on the next method, which is this, and it was called set pre-fight, parentheses, and semicolon. So now we do actually run these two different methods below us once we call on this one method inside the object here, which means that right now we're going to go back to index.html, and inside the index page we're going to need a way for us to tell the JavaScript method what player we chose inside the front page. So the way we do that is by inside the onClick event, I'm going to go ahead and call on the method we have inside our JavaScript game object. So I'm going to say we have a game manager object. So instead of saying this dot the method, we're going to say game manager dot the method because we're not inside the actual object, so we can't use this anymore. So we're going to say we have a game manager object, the dot, and it was called reset. No, not reset player. What was it called? We go into the game manager just to double check. Set game start. It was called. Parentheses. And inside the parentheses, we need to bring in some information in order to tell it inside the reset player method what player we chose as as us inside the browser. So we're going to bring in some kind of text. So I'm going to say we have the warrior here at the top. So I'm just going to say warrior. And we can't use double quotes because we use double quotes inside the onClick event. So we're going to use single quotes in here because we're bringing in a string. So after doing this, we can just simply copy paste into the other onClick events we have inside the front page. So I'm just going to change it to rogue in the next one. And do notice I spelled it capitalized. You can, of course, choose to not do that and then just need to change something slightly inside the JavaScript function or method. Don't know why I keep saying function. But we're just going to go ahead and change the other ones we have down here. So I'm going to say hunter as the last one. There we go. So now that we have this done, we do actually have everything we need to have inside the index page, and all the rest of the changing the UI and everything is going to happen inside the JavaScript methods. So going into our game manager, I'm going to first of all say, well, we did actually tell it to bring in a string from inside the index page. So we need to go back to the game manager object, and inside the function here, we need to bring in a variable from the outside. So whatever we insert into the parentheses in the index page is going to be set equal to class type, which is a variable. And then I'm just going to go ahead and copy paste the variable into reset player. So now we're bringing in the text called warrior or hunter or mage or whatever into the reset player method, which means that once we go down into the reset player method, we also need to paste it in to make sure we bring it into the reset player method. And inside of here, we're going to set the player status. So inside the reset player method, we're going to create what is called a switch condition, which is sort of similar to if and else statements in the way that we can go ahead and set up some different scenarios using JavaScript code. And depending on what the player chose inside the class type, whether it being warrior, rogue, whatever, it's going to go ahead and set the player equal to that character that we chose inside the index page. So just to go ahead and create it, because it's better to show than just talk about it, I'm going to create a switch statement. So we're going to say, well, we do actually get a pop-up suggestion here, so we're just going to create it. So we're creating a switch, parentheses, curly brackets, and then inside the switch statement, we set up a case, which means that right now we do actually need to bring in class type into the switch as a variable. And depending on this variable here, if case 1 is equal to, let's say, warrior, then we're going to set the player equal to the warrior class we chose from inside the game. So what we can do down here is we can say we have, first of all, some code we need to run. So we're going to take the player from inside the player object that we set at the top here. Remember from the previous episode, I said that we couldn't set the player inside another object method because that was going to mess up things. If not, then do go back and watch that part because it's pretty important. So we're going to set this specific player variable we created in the previous episode equal to the player that we chose inside the game. And this one is just simply called player. So in here we can just say we have a player variable that we already created inside the global, the global part of our JavaScript files. And we're just going to go and set this one equal to a new player object, which we have inside the player JavaScript file as well, which is right here. So we have all these information we need to fill out depending on this specific player class type. So we're going to go back to the game manager object and we're going to say we have a new player object, which we created ourselves. And in here, I'm just going to go and insert the class type into the first parameter because inside the game or the player object, we have the class type set as the first one. Then we have health, mana, strength, agility, and speed. And we need to fill all this information into the player that we're creating inside the game manager method. So the reason that I wanted the string that we inserted inside the index page to be with a capitalized first letter is because now we can actually call on this specific class type inside the player object, and then we'll get the actual name of the character without having to do extra JavaScript code to capitalize the first letter. It's already done ahead of us, which is much better to do. So afterwards, we're going to go ahead and set up the player. So we're going to say, well, the warrior is going to have, let's say, 200 in health. So what we're doing here is we're setting up one case where we chose the warrior, and then we're going to create all the stats for the warrior in this example here. Then afterwards, we're going to create another case condition that is going to say, well, what if the player chose hunter? And then we're going to set up some new stats for that specific player object instead. So just to finish off the warrior here, I'm going to say we have 0 in stats. I don't exactly remember what these specifics are labeled as. Again, you can just go back and look at them. Mana, strength, agility, speed. I have my notes here, so I'm just going to fill in what I have. 150. So this is going to be the warrior spec, which means that he has a lot of strength and he has very little agility inside this, the numbers here. So now that I have this, we can actually go ahead and copy the case without the default one down here, which it threw me inside Sublime Text, inside the editor. I'm just going to shift everything back by holding down Shift Tab, because that is a neat trick you can do. And then I'm going to change the text into something else. So we're going to say rogue and simply change the stats in here. So now player is going to be equal to something else instead if we chose the rogue instead of the warrior. So it's going to be 100. Then it's going to be 0, 100, 150, and 200, which I think is the speed we have back here. Then I'm going to copy paste. Whoops. Go back. I can't see my keyboard. Paste it in, and again Shift Tab just to bring the code back. Then I'm going to change this one to mage. Then I'm going to set the one to 80 because the mage is not very strong in strength. Then I'm going to set 50. I might be mistaken there. I don't exactly remember what the stats are here. 200. And then we have 100. Actually, no, that is actually 50. Then I'm going to copy paste one more time and do the same thing for the last one, which is the hunter. And again, if you want to bring in more characters, then you can just go ahead and create more characters here that you can use for your game. You can just spit in as many as you want. Hunter, and I set this one to 200, 0, 50, 200, and 100. I think I tried to make all the numbers sort of even up, so everything evens up to the same amount. I don't think I did that in the end, but that's what I aimed to do while I created the stats for these characters, so no character was overpowered compared to the other one. So after we did this, I'm just going to go and delete the default down here, because the default is going to run if none of these cases are going to be met. So if the text inside class type is not going to be warrior, rogue, mage, or hunter, then the code is going to go, then what? And that's what the default one down here is for. So we can actually create some code in here and just simply run it if none of these were actually chosen. So I'm just going to go and delete that one because we don't actually need it. You could say that there has to be a pop-up that says error and then it refreshes the page and you have to start over or something. But just in this example here, I don't think we need to have a default one. So now that we did this, we need to set the player inside the interface because we created the player now, depending on what we chose. And now we need to actually decide how the interface needs to look like. As you can see inside my example here, I want to choose a character. This is the finished version, by the way. This is not the one we're building on. If I were to choose the rogue, you can see we have the rogue showing up here with a image and all the stats down here. And that's what we're going to set up right now. So going back to our version, if I were to go down below our switch, I'm going to go ahead and create a variable or a let type variable. I still haven't figured out how I need to say that. Get interface. That is going to get the actual interface from inside the index page. I think I just whistled there. Inside the index page, we're going to get a specific class called interface, because if we were to go back and check, you can see we have a couple of different sections. We have a header section, we have an interface section that is pretty long, then we have an action sections, arena section, and an enemy section. So we need to take all the content from inside the interface section, which right now as a default we can choose a character, and we need to delete the content and insert new content inside the interface. And that is going to be just the stats for our player here. So going back to the game manager, I'm going to say first of all we need to actually grab the interface from inside the index page. So we're going to say we have a document dot query selector. I did get asked why I didn't use document get element by ID or get element by class in the previous episode in the comments, and I just want to point out that I do have a separate episode talking about why I choose to use query selector instead of these two other functions, which are the old version of graphing stuff, which you could argue might be slightly faster, but it's so little they're faster that we might as well just use query selector. I think I spelled this wrong. I think that is query selector, just so we don't get a spelling mistake. So I want to grab the class called, I believe it's called interface. It's called interface. And then I want to insert content into the interface, what do you call it, div elements we have inside the index page. So what I want to do here is I want to say we want to get the interface dot inner HTML is going to be equal to some HTML code or markup, because HTML is not really code. You could argue that. And now we're going to insert a bunch of HTML markup, just like we did with inside the index page, but we're going to do it using JavaScript. So I'm just going to go ahead and write this here. This should be very simple HTML. I shouldn't really need to explain this to you, but I will sort of talk about it while I start writing. So the first thing I want to insert is an image or an avatar of this specific player that we chose. So I'm going to say we have an image. Then I want to say we have a source that's going to be equal to single quotes. Actually, another way to do this that would be easier would just be use single quotes on the outside and then double quotes on the inside, just so we don't accidentally write something wrong. And then I want to dig into my image folder inside my project file. or project folder and get avatar dash player. After digging into the avatar dash player folder, which I also have inside my image folder, I'm going to say I want to grab the specific file name, and the file name is going to be decided by some JavaScript code, because right now we can't just write what the file name needs to be. It actually needs to be dynamic, so it changes depending on what we chose up here. So we need to go out from the string by breaking up the string here and say plus plus, because we're going to include some JavaScript code. Again, this is not plus as in we're going to add 1 plus 2 or something. This just means that we're going to use a string operator that is going to couple string together with JavaScript code. And again, this is something I taught previously, so you should know this by now. I'm going to grab the class type that we set up here, because that is going to be warrior or hunter or whatever we chose from inside the index page. And then I'm going to run a JavaScript method that's going to be called to lower case and parentheses, which simply converts the entire name of the specific character we chose to lowercase letters. So warrior with a capitalized W is not going to have capitalized W anymore. And this is going to be .png after it, because I used PNG images inside my file. And now we have the link to the image. Afterwards, we're going to go ahead and add a what do you call a image description. Well, we could just not do that because we don't really need to SEO optimize for this specific thing. But in a regular website, I would recommend you to create a alt tag that also have the image description inside of it. That is basic HTML. You should know how to do that by now. But I will also include a class, because that is going to be relevant once we do add the style sheet afterwards. So in the next episode, the class that I'm going to choose here is going to be called class equal to image avatar, image dash avatar. And that is basically it for the image. Then afterwards, I'm going to open up, and again, we could just go to view, toggle soft wrap, so everything jumps on one screen so it doesn't continue out infinitely. Then afterwards, I'm going to create a div box that is going to contain all the information that we have of the character. So I'm going to say I have a div, we have an h3 element that is going to describe the name of the actual character we chose. So I'm going to say we have class type. So again, we need to break this up by saying we have single quotes. There we go, plus plus. Then we need to set the class type. There we go. So we have the name for the class. And then afterwards, we need to close off the h3 tag. So now we have the title for the character, which again, if I go back here, is going to be what we have right here. Then after the title tag, we're going to create a paragraph that is going to contain the health of the player that we chose inside our game here. So we're going to say we have a paragraph using HTML. I'm going to close it off straight away. There we go. And inside the paragraph, we're going to say we have health, colon. And then I want to add some JavaScript code again. So I'm just going to go ahead and say we have closed off the string, plus plus. And then I want to include the player dot health. Now again, player dot health is referring to the player we created up inside the switch statement. So you can see we have the player variable that is equal to an object, or this is actually an object constructor based off the player object we have. So right now the player object has this dot health, and because you created a variable called player equal to the player object, this is going to be replaced with the player variable that we created up here. So player.health is going to be equal to what we have in here inside the player object we created inside the switch statement, just so you know what exactly we're referring to here. So player.health is going to be equal to, in this case, if I chose the warrior, 200, I do believe that is the health, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it's going to be equal to 200. So afterwards, I'm just going to go ahead and copy paste my paragraph, because we need to have a couple more. We need to have one for the mana. So I'm going to say mana and change player.mana. And again, we're just going to do this for all of them. So I'm just going to paste in the next one, which is going to be equal to strength. Now I can just sort of get a review of what exactly each of these numbers mean. So the next one is strength, which is a difficult word to spell if you're not Native American or British or whatever language you might spell that way. The next one is going to be agility. Again, we have agility. And then the last one is going to be the speed. I do believe that was the last one. Just double checking. Yeah, I do think that was the last one. If not, then we're going to have to come back and change it. So now we set the interface, and after doing this, we just need to simply close off the div tag that I created up here. So we're going to create a closing div tag. That is important, we don't forget that. And now we just finished off this specific function or method inside this object we have here called game manager. So once we run the reset player, we're going to set the player and set the player inside our game, which is kind of cool. So what we can do now is we can actually try and test this. I don't know if it's just going to give us a error, but if we were to choose the warrior, you can see everything gets deleted. And now we have the player set inside our browser here, which is kind of cool. We have all the stats here. We have everything that we need to have inside the interface of this specific player. So we can actually reset, and we can go ahead and choose the rogue, and you can see everything changes depending on what specific character we chose inside the game. So let's go ahead and set the pre-fight, which is going to be the actual overall look of the game that we're going to change once we do actually click a player. So inside the set pre-fight method, we're going to grab some different elements we have inside the index page, because we need to change all the contents of the different sections inside the index page in order for it to match up with the game. So as you can see, if we were to go into my version here and just sort of refresh, you can see once I do click a character, we get a couple of different elements here. We have first of all the character. We also have a header up here that has a task inside of it. That is a different section by itself. We have a button area where we have actions you can actually choose. And then we have an arena and an enemy area down here. So we need to make sure we delete all the content from the previous existing one and jump into this new stage and fill in the new content into the game here. So inside the set pre-fight method here, the first thing we're going to grab and change is going to be the header section, which is the top part with the task inside of it. So we're going to say we have a let type variable, and we're going to say get header. Again, it's sort of a habit inside JavaScript and other languages that when you want to grab something, you call it get whatever, and if you want to change something, you call it set whatever. So set header, for example. We're going to go and set this equal to document dot query selector, which I think I spelled correctly this time. I did. And then we're going to refer to the header section inside the index page. So we're going to say double quotes, and I do think it was called header, just simply header, which is kind of neat. We don't have to do something complicated. And remember to insert the class as well. Then I'm going to grab the actions section, which is going to be right under our player avatar, where we have the buttons where you can search for an enemy and attack and that sort of thing. That is going to be changed as well. So I'm going to change this one to from get header to get actions. I do believe I called it. And then I'm going to change the class to actions. Then afterwards, we're going to paste it in again because we're not done grabbing things yet. We need to get the arena. So I'm going to say we have get arena. And then inside of here, we're going to say arena. There we go. So now we can start changing it just like we did inside the previous method. So underneath here, I'm first going to go ahead and change the header. So we're going to say get header dot inner HTML is going to be equal to double quotes. Actually not double quotes, because like I said before, it's easier with single quotes. And then I'm going to go ahead and create a paragraph. Inside the paragraph, we're going to go ahead and say we have a task, colon, not tak, that actually means thank you in Danish, just FYI, task. And then we're going to say find an enemy, if I can spell that. There we go. Exclamation mark. And then we're going to go ahead and close off the paragraph, like so. And that's basically it for the header. Then we're going to go down to the next part. We're going to say get actions. I'm sorry if you guys can hear the keyboard. It might be pretty loud. Dot inner HTML. Single quote. And semicolon. Then we're going to go ahead and change this one. So we have a link because we need a button to click on. So I'm going to say we have a link, which is an anchor tag. Just going to close it off again immediately. There we go. And inside the anchor tag, we're going to set a hyperreference to nothing. So we're going to set equal to hashtag, which means that it's just empty. It doesn't really lead anywhere. And then we're going to go ahead and insert a class, because once we do get to the styling part in the next episode, we need to make sure we have the classes all inserted correctly. So we're going to call this one button pre-fight. I called it. So that's what we're going to call it. BTN pre-fight. And then we're going to go ahead and set a on-click event, because once we click this specific button, we need to jump to the next stage, which is the fight stage, where we do actually start battling with the other opponent. And once we click this button, after we search for an enemy, we're going to run a separate method that is going to randomly generate a enemy depending on the enemy object we created in the previous episode. And then we're going to fight him and change the layout of the arena. So the on-click event here is to make sure we run the next stage the way that we need to run it inside the game. So this is a pretty important on-click event. So we're going to make sure we have that. And I'm just going to go ahead and set this one to game manager. Again, we didn't create this method yet, but I'm just going to insert it so we have it. Dot set fight parentheses. Then inside the anchor tag, we're going to go ahead and say search for an enemy, or just search for enemy. You could write it whatever way you want to. I'm just going to say search for enemy, just so it's the same as my notes over here. And afterwards, we're going to go and change the arena. So we're going to say get arena, and then we're going to say dot inner HTML equal to single quote semicolon. That is important, because otherwise you're going to get a error. If you get some what do you call undefined syntax error or something, then make sure you check for semicolons and all that sort of thing, because I get a lot of questions in the comments of people saying that they get a syntax error, which is when you don't close something off properly. So make sure you double check that. If you double check your code and you still can't find the error, double check it again, because I have a lot of you posting in the comments, sort of asking me to help you find the error. Well, you claim that there's no error, but I always find one. So make sure you double check it again and again and again until you find a syntax error, because I promise you there will be an error in your code where you missed something. So double check it. Now, I did actually just notice that I didn't actually want to change the inner HTML here, because that is not what I have in my notes. Instead, I did actually already create the styling and the setup and everything for the arena. What I just want to do here is I want to set it to visible, because inside my CSS styling, I set it to hidden as a styling, so we can actually see it inside the game, but it's actually there, but we just can't see it. So I'm going to change the CSS styling instead of saying that we want to insert HTML into the arena part. So I want to say we want to access the style property we have inside JavaScript, and using the style property, I want to change something specific. So I want to change a specific styling for this specific section here. So I want to set visibility, which is a CSS styling, FYI, equal to visible, which is just simply going to make it visible inside our browser here. So now that we have this, we're basically done with the pre-fight part here. Now again, we didn't create the setFight method yet, which we referred to, but let's go and check out what we have inside the browser here. So if I were to refresh, click the rogue, then you can see we don't really get anything that different other than search for enemy. The actual arena that we're supposed to see after we set it to visible is not here yet, because we haven't actually activated the styling yet. So we can't see the arena before we apply styling to it, just so you know it. What we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and set the fight stage. So afterwards, we're going to create a new method. So we're going to say comma, again, syntax, check for it. And we're going to say set fight. And then we're going to go ahead and say we have a colon, function, parentheses, semicolon, or not semicolon, curly brackets. And inside the setFight method, we're going to first of all grab the different sections again, just like we did before. So we're going to just copy paste what we have here, paste it in. Now we do need to change one thing here, because we don't want to get the arena again, because we just needed to show that in the previous method. Instead, we're going to go ahead and get the enemy section we chose inside our our HTML. And just so you don't get confused, we do actually have an enemy section down here, just like we have an arena, actions, and so on. So we're not referring to anything inside JavaScript when I say enemy. So it's just a enemy section inside the HTML markup. So I'm going to change the class as well to enemy. And afterwards, we're going to go ahead and create different enemies that we can actually have inside the game. So this is where, just like with the player that we have up here, you could choose one for warrior, rogue, and you could create your own ones afterwards. You can do the same thing for the enemy. In my example, I just chose to have 2 because we just need an example. So the first enemy, and I'm just going to go ahead and create a comment here, just so we have it. Create enemy. Again, it's important you have comments inside your code. I should probably have helped you create comments in your version, but I think you can go ahead and do that yourself, because I think I explained it pretty well when I explained the different code here. So just go ahead and create comments. It's very good for you. In the future, once you return to the code, you can actually see what the different sections do. So afterwards here, I'm going to go ahead and create a let variable. I'm going to call this one enemy 0, and I'm going to go ahead and set this one equal to new enemy, which is the enemy object we have inside our enemy file, which is right here. So inside this enemy here, we're going to insert the stats that we want this specific enemy to have. So in this case, we're going to say, well, we can actually go back to the enemy object and see what we have here. We have enemy type, health, mana, strength, agility, and speed. So the enemy type is going to be a name that we're going to give the enemy. So I'm going to call this something using a string. And the first one I'm going to call a goblin. And again, you can just make up something you want to call it. I just called mine a goblin because that's what I have an image for. And then we're going to insert the other stats as well, such as health and that sort of thing. So for the goblin here, I don't think this is a very strong enemy. So I'm just going to set 100, 0, 50. Again, I'm just looking at my notes over here. 100 and 100. And then we can create the next enemy we want to have. So I can say we have another constructor that's going to be called enemy 1. And this one is going to be called troll. Then I'm going to change the stats because I think the troll is slightly stronger than a goblin. So I'm going to say we have 150 instead, and we have 80 over here. And then we have 150 at the end here. Again, if the enemy becomes too strong or too weak, then you can just sort of tweak the numbers in here, and then next time you play, it's going to be more difficult or easier for you to beat the game. So now we need to do something rather annoying. Right now, JavaScript does not have a specific function or any sort of way for you to get a random number, at least in a very simple way. So the way we need to generate a random number, because right now we need to get a number from 0 to 1 that is going to randomize which enemy gets chosen. So it's just going to randomly choose 1 or 0. 0 or 1, yeah. So we're going to run a very annoying process that I will create a separate episode on after we're done with this specific project here. So I will have a mini episode on just explaining this. So don't worry if you don't quite understand it. We're going to create a let type variable. I'm going to call this one choose random enemy. And I'm going to set this equal to a math object we have inside JavaScript. Just like we have other types of objects, we also have a math object that has a property called floor. And again, I'm going to explain all these properties and methods in the next, not the next, but the next episode after that one, because in the next one, we're going to do the styling for this game here. Parentheses. This is not a property, by the way. This is a method. Semicolon. Inside the floor method, we're going to run another math, another math object with a method. So we're going to say dot random, parentheses, because this is a method. And we're going to go ahead and keep this one empty. And then we're going to multiply with another math object, dot floor, which again is a method. And then we're going to insert a number into the floor here. We're going to insert 2. And again, this is a very annoying way to get a random number generated, because there should be a much simpler way to do it. But this is how we can do it in JavaScript so far. There might be a function or something in the future we can use, but right now this is how we need to do it. The reason I want to create a separate episode on it is because I know people will search for this inside Google or YouTube, and I want to have a video that sort of explains how to get a random number between two numbers. So that is going to be a separate episode. Just know that choose random enemy is going to choose a random number between 1 and 0 right now. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to run a console log, because I want to actually see what exactly we get when we do run this specific random enemy number, just to show you. So I'm going to say we have a console.log, parentheses, and then I just want to insert choose random enemy. Again, just to sort of show you what this method here does, or what this long equation here does. If I were to refresh, choose the rogue, for example, and then go into my console log, then if we were to click search for enemy, because we don't run the setFight function until we click search for enemy, when I click it, you can see we get 1. If I click it again, you can see we get 1, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, and we get a bunch of random numbers between 0 and 1. So it's going to randomly choose an enemy for us to use inside our game here. So that is what that specific thing does that we just created. Afterwards, we're going to go ahead and create a switch. And as you can see, I just deleted my console log because we don't actually need it. So I'm just going to go ahead and create another switch. Inside the parentheses, I'm going to say we want to, depending on choose random enemy, I want to run a specific case. And I'm just going to delete the default one because we don't need that in this example as well. And the first case is going to be that it ends up being 0. So if case is 0, then it's going to choose enemy number 0 up here. So we're going to say that enemy is going to be equal to enemy 0. Now you might be asking, what did we just do here? Well, we just took the enemy variable from inside our enemy file. As you can see in here, we have the enemy object, but we also have the enemy variable up here at the top. And again, this is the exact same thing we did with the player. We just simply took the player variable and assigned it equal to the character that we chose inside our file or inside the game here. And we did the same thing for the enemy. We have the enemy variable already created, and now just simply assign it equal to one of the enemies that we chose up here. So that's basically what we did here. So now that we did the case 0, we can do case number 1. So if it ends up being 1 inside of here, just choose 1, there we go. We want to set enemy equal to enemy 1, which is the troll. So we have the goblin and the troll here. So after we did this, we need to change a couple of things, because we also grabbed the header, the actions, and the enemy section. Now we need to take the information we have here and insert into the actual game inside our browser. So after the switch, I'm going to jump down to the next line, and then I'm going to say we want to first of all change the header. So we're just going to say get header dot inner HTML, so equal to some kind of HTML markup. And again, I'm just going to sort of write this and explain as I'm writing it, because this is basic HTML. The first part we need to do here is I want to change the header text. So we're going to say we have a paragraph. Could also just copy it from above if you wanted to make this faster. And we're going to say task is going to be choose your move. So we can choose to attack. And again, I did originally plan to have a defend, attack, and dodge or something like that, which is why I say choose your move. Well, there's only one move we can choose from. But this is how I decided to end up making the game, because it was going to be a much too long episode to do the other thing. Afterwards here, I'm going to say we want to get actions, and then I want to say dot inner HTML. And I do also think we can just copy from above here. So I'm just going to go up to the actions, and I'm just going to go and copy what we have. There we go. And paste it in here. Then inside of here, the only thing we're going to change is going to be the text we have inside the anchor tag. So I'm going to say, instead of search for enemy, I'm going to say attack, exclamation mark. And we're going to run a different object instead of game manager this time, because I do actually want to create a new object that we haven't created yet inside the player file that is going to handle all the attacks and whatever the player might end up doing inside the game. I think these are all related to the player, which is why I decided to put them inside inside the player file. So we're going to say we have a object called player moves. So we're going to say player moves dot and then a method called calc attack. It's going to calculate the actual attack from the player here. parentheses, of course. And then we need to change the get enemy section. Now, again, we will create the object in, I think we'll do it in just a second. We'll have to end up seeing how long this episode is going to be. And we're also going to go and create the method here. So afterwards, we're going to say we have a get enemy dot inner HTML that is going to be equal to some HTML markup. And what this is going to be equal to is going to be equal to this sort of the same information we have with the player up here. It's going to be an avatar. It's going to be some stats. It's going to be all the different things we also have for the player. Now I'm just going to copy it from my notes here. And if you want to have the exact same thing, just go ahead and pause the video and see what we have on the screen here. If my face cam is in the way, I will remove the face cam so you can see it. Just go ahead and pause the video and write the exact same thing as I have here. Now I just need to point one thing out, which is that right now you can see the text down here is actually white instead of red like it usually is with JavaScript code. I did double check this many times. There's nothing wrong here, at least not from what I could tell. If you find an error, go ahead and fix it. This code works the way it needs to work, so I don't think there's anything wrong here. I think it's my text editor that is messing up the text color here. So if you can find an error that I missed, then good for you, change it. But I can't see an error here, and I don't know why it's changing the color inside the text. So what we're going to do now is afterwards we're actually done with this specific function or this specific method. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to test out what we have inside our game. So I'm going to refresh the browser, choose a character. Let's choose the mage this time. Actually, let's choose the hunter. And then you can see once I click search for an enemy, we get a random enemy. And we also have an attack button here. And again, this is all randomly generated. If I were to go back, do it again, then you can see we get the troll this time. So I was lucky and I got a 1 as the type of enemy that we wanted to get. And the enemy changed. So now what we want to do is we want to do something once I click attack. Because right now we don't actually have a method that we can run once we click attack. Okay, so I just finished recording this game project episode, and it's going to be a long episode if I have to include everything in one video, at least in this part 2. So I'm going to make one more episode after this one that is going to be part 3, that is going to finish off the game project. Now I know it's not a lot of fun to have many episodes on one project on YouTube, so to sort of make up for this, I'm going to include the CSS file for this project in the description of this video for free, not including Patreon. So it's going to be a direct link where you can download the file so you can style everything like I have in this episode or in this entire course here. So I hope to see you guys in the next episode.
All right, so provides the CSS for you, which is pretty awesome. So you don't have to worry about that. Now, if you were going, I apologize to anyone who was going along creating their CSS as they were going. That's fine. That's fine. It's actually beneficial because, as you may recall me mentioning a moment ago, a way that you could modify, not have the alert box pop up, but instead have it be in the arena area. Instead of it saying arena, it could instead say like battle log or something like that, right? So what I would then like for us to do is I would like for us to take a break, and let's make it let's come back at 10:30, and we will try to get caught up and everything on anything that you missed and that sort of thing, and applying the CSS to it and all that sort of thing. So go ahead and come back at 10:30, and we will have official lab time, if you will.